This week on The Futurists, Colin Megill.
We have seen these basically companies, the political parties as donation-taking entities, collapse under the power of personality on the left and the right.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tersick. I am the co-host of the program. My other co-host, Brett King, is traveling. Last time I spoke to him, he was scuba diving by Phi Phi Island off the coast of Thailand. Lucky guy. Meanwhile, I'm back at the shop, and I'm going to do an interview today that's going to touch on some of the turbulent political issues that are circulating from time to time. We delve into that topic. And we're going to return to a topic we've looked at in the past, which is decentralization and decentralized governance. My guest today is someone who's actually taking action. He's been working on this for many years, for about 15 years, building a system that enables decentralized governance, or at least the collection of decentralized opinions. So here is my warm welcome to Colin Megill, a new friend. It's somebody I'm thrilled to know. Hi, Colin. Welcome to The Futurists.
Hi, Rob. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So this is a show I've wanted to record for more than a year, so I'm very happy that you've got the time. Thank you for making time. I know you're very busy. Why don't you start by telling people what Polis is? Just give us a brief overview of what that is, and then we'll talk more about computational governance or computational democracy.
Yeah, so as a technology, Polis is an open source system, and that means every line of code is available online. All the algorithms are there for anybody to look at, and it's for collecting opinions. Sites like Reddit do this, but different sites have different approaches towards what happens to the data and how they're analyzed. In our case, the idea is that the opinions are gathered. People make statements, and then other people agree, disagree, and pass on those statements. And then we look at patterns. And when we find patterns of groups of people that vote similarly, we want to know what makes them different. And we give that back to everybody so that people know what makes them unique. And we also look for things that look for statements, look for opinions that are bridging. That is the term. It's like a consensus that's informed by the existence of groups from an algorithmic perspective. And if anybody's familiar with Community Notes, we'll get there later. We worked with Twitter for about a year before Community Notes was built and launched before the acquisition to build that. And so we can touch on a little bit about that maybe later on too.
Okay, that's great. That's a good starting point. So for the folks who are listening, this is a way to find out what a great number of people are thinking. And Polis works at the scale of tens of thousands of people. Has it been deployed any larger than that?
Yeah, it's been deployed into the tens of thousands of people in Europe, inside of political parties. Like in that case, it's like a membership of a party talking about what they think.
Okay, so it's a way to kind of get the group. You can find out what's on the mind of the group. And we start out with a proposition, right? So someone says, should we do X, or should we do Y? Or actually, would it be simpler to say, should we or do X or not?
It's actually probably better to think about it as like, there's an issue, and, so you're going to ring the bell and you're going to say, what's everybody think about X? And so in this case, perhaps the best covered case was the case of Uber in Taiwan. What's everybody think about Uber coming into the country? And that was the most widely profiled case. There was it's a VC-backed startup. They are trying to move very quickly, and there's a national transportation infrastructure, and all the domestic taxi cabs have to pay taxes. The international company doesn't have to pay. Insurance, regulations, all the rest of it. And so it was very controversial. Pricing and, things can change overnight. So they wanted smart, fast regulation. And they used Polis to scale it up, get thousands of people in, find consensus, and it became law. And that was one of the most high-profile cases.
So how did they start? Like, what question would you start with? Should we allow Uber in the country?
Yeah, you should say, yeah, that's a great one. That's a great framing. Or it was used in Hawaii after the fires, and you might say, an event has just occurred. What should happen next? What has to happen next? What should happen next?
Now, that's a more open-ended question. So I thought Polis worked as a yes or no or pass, right? That you're answering on a phone, and it's basically a choice of A, B, or no answer.
Yeah, great question. So Polis is initiated with a very open-ended prompt, and then once people come in, they begin submitting statements. So you can have tens of thousands of statements, and then each person submits their own take. They're writing just like they would online, and those statements go out randomly to everyone else one at a time, and then everyone agrees, disagrees, and passes on those statements. And so the idea then is that you have a lot of writing from the public and a lot of voting from the public, and you get a matrix. You get what everyone thought about what everyone said, and that's usually what's missing. You don't necessarily have any meaning of that particular pattern because it's complicated. You need some
Right.
statistics over top of it.
So it's not a single question, it's thousands of responses to a
Correct.
single proposition. And then
Correct.
those thousands of responses cascade into many thousands of opinions about the response.
Millions of votes. Millions.
Right. Okay. So now we get to the computational part because for those who are interested in listening, you'll find information about Polis at compdemocracy.org.
Correct.
And comp democracy is short for computational democracy. So tell me about the computational part here. There obviously is a lot of number crunching going on because we just
Love
talked about millions of intersecting conversations. And
That's right.
as it cascades, different opinions are ricocheting off of other opinions. So you start
That's
to get
right.
multiple cascading consequences. Okay, so
That's
now I start to understand the complexity of the problem. It's not just a yes or no statement.
It's not just a yes or no statement, but in fact, it's emergent. There's thousands, as you said, thousands of statements, and then millions of votes on those thousands of statements. That's right. The substrate, so to speak, of everybody speaking, that everyone's voting on. That bit's emergent. That's like a survey created by the people taking it. Is one way to think of it. So it can kind of go anywhere. That's where Polis is a little bit freer on the citizen angle, on the bottom up angle.
Right. Yes, that's true. Like most polling that at least Americans are familiar with
Yep.
is it's giving you a choice of chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry,
Right.
and it doesn't really allow you to offer black raspberry as an option. You can't come back with a third or fifth option if in a poll like that.
That's
By the way, this is used for political effect with push polling. Where they
that's
write the questions in such a way where they can kind of predetermine the outcome. And a lot of Americans are not aware of that when they're participating in a poll. What they're really getting is a skewed system. It's not a neutral polling system. Here, what you're saying is there's actually, first, I can respond in a neutral fashion. It'll capture that. But if I have another opinion, if I've got a third option, I can propose that back to the system in the form of like basically a text message. So it's
Yep.
effectively like an SMS,
That's
140
right.
characters.
That's right. That's right. It could be implemented as SMS. You could send text to people, and they could say one, two, or three for agree, disagree, or pass. That's correct. The whole system works with write, read, one, two, three. The whole system works on that, and I think that it's an important angle here to look at it from the political polling angle, because political polling globally is completely broken, and on one hand, and also the data's gone over the falls. Right, we've seen that in the past few elections, and we've got terrible. Skewed results and some, people being wildly wrong about the underlying fact. People aren't picking up the phone, and they know and they know that the data isn't being collected in a straightforward way, and they know they're tired of answering the same pollsters. So we have a major problem with political opinion and the way that it goes from what people feel about the country back into the political agenda setting, and that's really the motivation for the technology, is to put that agenda setting piece back into the public's hands.
Another way to think of that is you're eliminating the middleman in the sense that, the way polling is done typically, sometimes a university or a news organization will commission a poll, and then there's a polling organization that constructs the poll, and they claim to be data scientists, and so they're going to try to do this as neutrally as they possibly can. But there are human beings involved, so naturally there's a human element that may or may not influence the outcome. We don't know. But then also on the receiving end, if you've received one of those political polls, it's usually a telephone survey. It usually takes 45 minutes, which these days is an awfully big ask. 45 minutes. And you can tell there's someone, a low paid worker is reading a bunch of questions off of a piece of paper, and it's kind of a painful process, I would say. So you have a lot of people who don't want to participate in a poll. They don't have the time to do it, or they drop off halfway through because it's like, wow, this is way too long. I would have answered two questions, but I'm not going to sit there for 45 minutes and answer all these questions. And they never seem to end. So as a result, you have relatively low participation rates, at least in the United States.
Right.
And then the people who do participate, they might be highly motivated because they care about that issue, so they're going to stay on the line. So you might not get a representative sample of people finishing the poll. And then there's the construction of the poll itself, which may or may not be entirely neutral. So you might be getting results that are skewed by the nature of the questions that are being asked.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all factors involved in it. The result has been, in the last 4 national elections, polls have gotten increasingly unpredictable and unreliable. So they're failing in their forecasting methodology. What you're proposing at least is going to give us a better insight into what people are thinking, because it's a much broader and faster process.
That's right.
Entirely voluntary. It's entirely participatory. It's not required to complete it. You could be a part of a Polis survey and answer 5 questions and say, okay, I'm done. I don't have time anymore. I'm out of this. And they still get some value from it.
500. Yeah.
Tell me how that works. Does this become a thing that ends up like consuming your life if it's a really controversial subject?
Well, we have seen people vote on 600, 700 statements. And I think that, one of the reasons that people are interested and willing to kind of give data is in part because they can stop whenever they want. So we do see people, but vote and just a few times. But we actually generally have an average of like 100 votes. And that's really high for participation rates, without any other incentive other than the main incentive, which is, there's no secret. The stuff that we do as a nonprofit is oriented to connect the opinions of people to power. And then when people see that there's a different process and it's open data, or it's open algorithm, and it's going to be received by someone in power, and they see themselves reflected in it, then we're into a more transparent process which approaches deliberation, or is deliberation of a kind, online, in the democratic sense. And that's something that we're really proud of, that when people show up, that they want to be there. And that's something that's a high bar to say for public opinion anywhere right now. And we've attained that, I think in part because of the open source nature of the system. People really see that they're doing something for themselves, and that's the main nonprofit 501c3 bent, is to produce data for the public, by the public.
Right. So your organization is not pushing any kind of agenda. You're simply making the tool available. And then some other organization would say, oh, we want to apply that to this particular issue with this particular group of people.
Yeah.
And so then they can freely download from GitHub the software, and they can run this themselves. You're not involved in the actual operation of the poll. Now, I have a few questions about how that works. Can I ask you a little bit about, like, basically, what do you get? Like, if I'm a user, the folks in Taiwan that did this, the folks in Sweden that used it.
Sure.
Do they need to cut a deal with your organization, or can they simply go to GitHub and get the software?
In fact, Taiwan runs their own node of the software, and Finland runs their own node of the software. The UK has inside the government for internal conversations and public-facing conversations, large-scale, ethnographies and things that they're doing like that. They run their own version of the software. So multiple national governments run the software themselves, and the public then controls the data, and the public controls the process.
So it's actually the national government that is operating this.
In those 3 cases, to pick up on those examples, they do typically running the software.
Or it could be a political party, right? You mentioned in Sweden, a political party.
Yeah.
Is there any grassroots organization using it? Is there any like nonprofit or NGO type of organization that uses it?
Definitely, academics and nonprofits all over the world. Yeah.
Okay, so it's available to anyone that wants to get that wants to survey a large number of people.
Correct. It's free. It's free to log in. It's Pol.is, and you can log in and get started. And it's about 3 clicks.
Okay. And then what's in the box? So let's say I go to GitHub and I download this because I'm politically motivated and I want to get the survey and I want to get the opinion of a large number of people.
Right. Well, you would probably go to Pol.is because it's the same software, and it's the nonprofit hosted for free for everybody to use, and it's not a trivial system to put up on the internet. So the national government.
So I don't even have to know how. I don't have to set up a server. I can actually run this off of Pol.is.
Pol.is is where you would go if you were going to do this. Yeah, that's right.
And then the next step for me would be to go solicit a lot of people to sign up for this, basically opt in.
Correct. So if you have a membership-driven organization like a union, for instance, and you wanted to talk to the membership, this is something that's been done as that's the kind of organization that would show up, poll membership and things like that. Or, March On, for instance, was the Women's March. Did one with in the States with thousands and thousands of women, thousands and thousands of perspectives. That's the kind of thing that a membership-driven organization that would use it in that sense. If you aren't perhaps a town.
Okay, so if you're already a member of an organization, that's pretty easy. You can distribute the poll to the membership.
Yeah,
What
that's
about
common.
what about organizations that don't have members, that they do want to get the opinion of people outside of their group? Now, here you might run into a problem, at least in this country, where there's resistance to giving up any information. I don't want my number, or I don't want my opinion attached to my number. I don't want the government to surveil me. So people are worried about that kind of an issue. Is that an issue with your system?
Well, absolutely. I think that people are voting with their feet, and they're voting with their feet when they hang up the phone on pollsters, and they're voting with their feet when they see an organization that they trust using Polis within a trusted context to move the dial somewhere. And so I think this is really fundamentally about how our systems for opinion hosted, distributed, and connected to power. And this is this is a big set of differences and assumption from the norm.
Mm. And is there a database that records all my yes and no's and my opinions? So somewhere that information is recorded.
That's right. If you were voting in the United Kingdom on their national instance as a citizen who was being approached by Policy Lab, the collective intelligence unit there, you would be your data would be stored there. If you were voting on Polis, the main instance, then your data would be stored with the Computational Democracy Project in the cloud.
And is there a way to obscure the data so that it can't be identified with a particular person, or does that break the
Anonymous, yeah,
system?
yeah. So it is it's an anonymous system for voting, and you don't have to log in to vote. That's how Polis works. So people come, they vote, and then there's there's what we would say like cookie friendly persistence after the UK decided they didn't like cookies, and Safari doesn't like cookies and things like that. So we do a basic form of persistence, but mostly the security for the system in that sense comes from distribution. If people see the link, it's a long link like a Google Doc, then they're participating. And one of the reasons to trust it is that it's a random number. It's a random number and letter combination. So you're going to a site, but the site is secret. And so people who have been invited have seen it, people who haven't, and then it wraps up. And so one of the most powerful forms of security in that case, just like with Google Docs, long links are, if you have the link, you have the link. It's somehow you found the site, somehow you saw the site, it was distributed through an email, or it was distributed on a local news site, and the people that showed up saw it. And then efforts are made generally in more rigorous campaigns that use Polis to go out and make sure it's demographically balanced and invite people. One of the nice things is that you actually get some organic spread if it's going out to the public and it's something that people recognize as a social good. People will bring people to the exercise, and that also is a very upside down assumption for public opinion.
So I can see the positive side of that, and because obviously here in this country we have the other problem, which is a diminishing number of people who are willing to be in a poll, right, or
That's right.
participate in a poll. So if you have people who are so enthusiastic that they're out there championing this poll and telling their friends, that I could see the benefit of that. But you can easily imagine that could be gamed, right? So if there's a group with a very strong motivation, maybe they're on the payroll of some, evil corporation, or they're really strongly aligned with one side of this particular issue, and they're going to go out and rally their membership. What would happen then if you were flooded with people who were kind of arriving preloaded?
It's happened in every single major poll. People are motivated to do that, and it turns out that we want that. The system is built for scale, and it's built to be resilient to that. Here's the specific way that Polis is resilient to brigading, which is one of the things and also astroturfing. Those two major public opinion gathering problems. So, in the case of brigading, let's say we have Uber messaging all of its drivers and saying, go show up and go vote. The taxi driver of company says, go show up and go vote. Well, it turns out that they did that. Both membership-driven organizations responded to the national government by rallying their membership. They went and they participated. Well, it turned out that the most powerful kind of like consensus found was between these groups of drivers who were also citizens of Taiwan. Even the Uber drivers, of course, are citizens. And it turned out that nobody thought that the cars should have to be painted yellow. People were okay with using their own car. Everybody thought driver's insurance was important. Everyone thought the taxation system was unfair if the local cabs weren't having to follow the same stuff. It didn't help. It didn't matter because they were citizens participating as citizens. And the algorithm. So there's that side. That there is consensus to be found.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is that or actually, it didn't even matter. It didn't to say that it was helpful to have everybody show up, and that should be the bar if people are going to show up and vote. But the other piece of it, which is material here, is that the algorithms in the system are built for this. The idea of clustering people and finding opinion groups, the opinion group is the fundamental kind of deliverable for Polis. You find groups of people that voted similarly, and then you say how they voted differently and similarly to each other and differently from everybody else and what the consensus was between them. This particular property means that if you have brigading, they're going to show up as their own group. And it's okay for them to do that. And they're just not going to swamp everyone else because we're so used to systems that don't have any sense of the property of voting among groups that we imagine that everyone else will get swamped. That's the assumption that if people come in and brigade, that it will null out or negate the opinions of those who have already voted. But in this case, it's kind of a big map. You could think of it as a big map of people that think different ways that's being created emergently on the fly. It's like a bottom up. It's like a political compass for every issue that kind of shows up if you voted in any of those. That shows up as the thing goes along and changes as it goes along. With that,
this is super interesting. So you just identified two things that actually strengthen democracy. So the first one is, it turns out on every issue, there's a lot of stuff that we actually agree on.
That's right.
And so you're uncovering where there's already consensus, and that might help narrow the scope of what's really controversial down to this little tiny box of issues.
That's exactly right.
Because we tend to agree on most of the stuff, right? Even the groups that are completely opposed to each other and they're fighting fiercely,
that's right.
The things they're fighting about are few in number, and the things they agree on turn out to be large in number. And this is a fundamental of negotiating for people to get to consensus. Like any kind of deal maker knows that you start with what do we agree on and narrow the list of issues down. And that's how that's an effective way, in business for striking a deal, but it could be effective in politics. And the second thing you mentioned there is there's actually a kind of energy that enters in. So when someone is organizing, and motivating their troops to get in there and really lobby hard and answer all the questions in the way that they hope they'll answer them and so on, then there's a natural opposing reaction to that. And suddenly you've got maybe it spreads, it gets more people engaged. And in a way that energizes democracy. It gets people more engaged. Now, to do that, I think you would need to have real-time data coming out so that people can see which way the poll is going. Is that the way it works, or is all the data collected, all the questions asked, and then at the end a report published afterwards? How does it work? Is it real-time, or is it?
It is real-time. The entire system is real-time. Yeah.
Okay, so you can actually you can see immediately if your group is having an influence and having an effect.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
And are all the different questions and comments, are they surfaced, and in what way are they surfaced to the public?
So that varies. We have a visualization that people can see, and they can see what makes their group their group. They can kind of see some issues. And I can say that that's one of the most exciting aspects of the next generation of the system, which we're launching. That after some years of R&D, actually. I'm so excited to talk about that, but I have to respond to what you said because you've really nailed the broken polling bit. The wedge issue bit. That is the whole thing. We do have a lot of consensus. Things like universal background checks, for instance. It's polling at 88, 92%. Everybody wants it. Well, universal background checks aren't helpful for political parties to market, and it's exactly as you said. So people advertise on the wedge issues. They advertise on the most divisive, most hurtful, most obscure, actually, thing they find, and they put up on a billboard. In fact, they know the consensus exists. They throw it away. They stay silent about it because it's not useful for them to gain power. And political parties have done this to the public.
Right.
fueled by billions of dollars of advertising. And both political parties do it. They do it in targeted ways, and it's awful. It's awful for democracy, and it's awful for the public. And the parties are
Right, right. You hear about politicians complaining that people are so divided and sort of pining for the days when everyone got along, when in fact the political machine is the one that's driving the wedge issue.
The political machine is the one that is driving the wedge issues. They have discarded the consensus that exists, and with it, they have a damaged American identity. And it's a specific action that they've taken based on the marketing needs of modern campaigning.
Well, the conversation is getting really good, but it is time for us to take our mandatory break. So we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in just a minute. Folks, keep listening. You're listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tersick, and my guest is Colin Megill of Polis. We'll be back just after this.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Hey, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tersick, and my guest this week is Colin Megill, who's been running this super interesting open source project. It's called Polis, or Polis, and I keep saying it one way and he says it the other, but we're both right. So there you go, consensus. So we, right before the break, we got to a very exciting part, which is this notion that the political machine is driving wedge issues in order to energize the public and get people to identify with a particular group. But in the process, what they're doing is demolishing that sense of goodwill and that sense of trust that people have. Even if we vote differently, we're all still, a part of the same country and so on. It's effectively what wedge issues do then is they give you an incentive to demolish consensus. They give you an incentive to demolish the governance structure and find some way around it. They get people so energized. And we seem to be living through a moment of that in the United States. Let me take the conversation back to the origin story. So my understanding, I might not have this right, but my understanding is that the origin of this initiative is back in around 2010, 2011, when we had the Arab Spring and concurrently the Occupy Wall Street movement. And people tend to forget that those two things happened simultaneously. But I remember very clearly, I was talking to the folks at Occupy in New York, and they were in direct communication with the people in Tahrir Square in Egypt, and they were coordinating their activities, but very lightly. Like these were truly decentralized, leaderless movements. They didn't have a charismatic political figure who was telling them what to do. It was all about consensus. It was all about group decision-making and so forth. Tell me about that moment in time and what inspired the origin of this program.
Yeah, well, I'd say that I was farming actually. I was organic farming out on the islands of San Juan Island, Washington, and when Occupy happened, so I was and when Arab Spring happened, and I was far away. My background is in international relations, and I got interested in collective behavior and problems like billion person democracy in India, and you can't get 10 people to decide how to go to dinner. Somebody just picks it. So the problems of like decision making and collective behavior across scale is really like one of the fundamental things I haven't been able to put down intellectually for the past 20 years. I'll say, my interest personally in technology and democracy goes back to I think really, really early. I was reading like Tom Clancy and Isaac Asimov in third grade. And I think under my desk, I'm just a really, really, passionate about both, but we need more interaction between those two fields because funny enough, it's happened kind of unintentionally for us. We haven't designed enough for democracy. We haven't designed enough technology for democracy. We're really, really behind on how we want to communicate with each other. And so I think that when Twitter came about, and it was there for mobilization and there for activism, what we saw was we got people into the streets and very quickly. But then coherence, group decision making, consensus building, and that stuff. Twitter, to put it lightly, is not optimal when people disagree. There's a lot of dunking in 2008 Twitter, and a lot of angry replies and a lot of kind of going off the rails. So, we've got technology that can mobilize people, but do we have technology that can keep them coherent and show them where they agree, even as they grow and even as
So that was the gap. That was the gap that you were trying to address. You're trying to fill or address that problem of
correct.
it's easy to get a conversation started, but on
Right.
Twitter turns into a flame war and a
That's
lot of
right.
invective and a lot of
That's right.
groups
That's
taking
right.
shots at each other. That
That's
doesn't
right.
really lead to consensus.
That's right.
So what's the flip side of that? How did you develop this?
So the technology was developed. There was a startup, so there was a foundational team that designed and built it as a for-profit startup that was socially motivated in Seattle, and we worked on it and found the social purpose in Taiwan. They picked it up, they used it nationally. A law was created, and so we open sourced it. That we talked to them
Mhm.
about it. They wanted to deploy it, and given that we had national impact within the first couple of years, and we said, okay, well, that's going to be a philanthropic action by the founders there to put the technology into the public realm. And when we did that, we had another path there that meant that anybody in the world could install the technology and control the data and everything else. And it turned out, that's really like a big contrast to other organizations and how they've operated. We did not take outside investment capital. There was no there's no secret other step there. The technology got open sourced, and then it's a 501(c)(3) that takes donations. And so other organizations that operate like this, like Signal, the messenger that's been in the news recently, secure communications, great software, had a similar trajectory. Moxie Marlinspike founder, builds it, gets acquired by Twitter, and then they spin it back out. They spin the system back out, and then it gets a donation, and then off it goes. So there's a story about nonprofit technology, open source technology, nonprofit systems that are also a big contrast to big tech in general, about what happens to the data, what you assume, what it has to do. And one of the jokes about this, and then I won't go on farther, is that the way the technology gets built, it doesn't take a whole ton of people to build a technology. It's when you bolt on the sales requirement, and you bolt on the investment requirement, you bolt on all the other things that it takes under capitalism. In fact, a small team of developers can do extraordinary things, and we hope to prove that, like others before us.
Okay, cool. You mentioned big technology companies, and you mentioned the profit motive that drives software projects to become corporations, for-profit businesses,
Yeah.
and then they get encumbered with all the apparatus and all the salespeople and the goals, the revenue targets, and all the rest that you mentioned.
Right.
So I understand that process well. I'm sure our audience does as well. You're reminding me, as you say that, of a conversation I just listened to between Tyler Cohen, the economist, and Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz. Recent
Not
podcast.
working, but I did it. Yeah, certainly.
So Chris is a very thoughtful guy about the topic of decentralization. He's written a book on the subject, Read, Write, Own, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So as background for the audience, there's three phases, they say, of the web. The Web 3 community will tell you there's three stages of the web. The first is the one you may remember from the 1990s, where it was all do-it-yourself, and it was very decentralized in the sense that people could put up their own web page wherever they wanted, as long as they had a server. And then somewhere around the 2000s, after the dot-com bubble burst, we saw Web 2 emerge, which was highly centralized. And that happened simultaneously with the rollout of rich media, things like YouTube, which is very expensive to stream and very expensive to host. So centralization offered some advantages. Or social media, which requires some complex technology. And again, it's a big hosting problem, there's a big data problem, and advertising behind that. These are things that are easily done by highly centralized organizations. And then what we saw was by the 2010, the rise of these enormous internet companies that now dominate about 70% of the activity on the World Wide Web. And it's almost impossible to escape the clutches of Meta or Google when you're on the web because their reach is so extensive. Google has the largest ad server, the largest ad network, the largest search. It's almost impossible to avoid these companies when you're on the web. And as a result, they have become very valuable organizations. They extract a tremendous amount of wealth. All the industries that they dematerialized and replicated in software on the web, they've been able to siphon the profits out of that. Great for their shareholders. In some respects, great for the U.S. stock market. They have been the drivers of the stock market boom for the last 15 years. But what we end up with is a highly, highly centralized version of the internet, meaning you as an individual have a very difficult time evading the clutches of these companies, and they are tracking every single thing that you do. They call it surveillance capitalism. There have been books published on the subject. And many people wonder, what's the next phase of the web? Will it continue in this vein? Will these highly powerful, highly centralized companies continue to dominate and extract profit? Or could it go back to a kind of decentralized approach whereby individuals are free to create, publish, distribute, disseminate ideas, and reorganize in whatever ways they wish for profit or from whatever motivation they have? And this is the subject that Chris Dixon's very focused on at Andreessen Horowitz. He's focused on their Web3 investments. Web3 is kind of geek speak for decentralized internet, and now they tend to focus on blockchain. So when you talk to folks in the Web3 community, they believe that blockchain is a decentralized consensus mechanism. Now, I noticed, Colin, you're not using blockchain and you never refer to blockchain or Web3. Can you help me understand the distinction? Is there one? Do you fit into that Web3 context?
I think that there are lots of people who are in that community that are aware of Polis and love Polis and know about it, and I talk to them over time. I don't personally identify specifically with well, I would say, like, as somebody interested in those technologies specifically. Like, I've never I've never found the blockchain narrative compelling as a database technology. I think that it's finding a home in payments and things like that. I suppose for something, stable coins and remittances, and there's a number of other places where it's trying to find a niche. But I think that the overarching narrative, I think the things that I do identify with it there are decentralization, open data, and open source, and things like that, which are, for instance, I would say the contrast between Twitter and Blue Sky. Blue Sky is attempting to put together a protocol, the AT protocol. They're trying to stick with open data. They've got all their data available. You can actually download every post on Blue Sky historically. That's an extraordinary public good that the company has done and has given people their data back to them. And so I think that in the broader, so I would say for me, not blockchain specifically, though I would say that there are particular algorithmic like advancements in ZK is a particular technology that has implications for identity that are very, very powerful. And so I think that my answer is probably much too detailed. So I'll try again and start again here.
Okay. Well, you don't rely on blockchain.
No, not at all. No.
Okay, but which is interesting because there's a computational cost to blockchain, which you avoid. So that's one thing. Your project is a little more lightweight. But it also says to me, and one of the things I'm gleaning here in this conversation today is that there is an element of centralization in what you're doing, because generally someone decides to run a survey through Polis and someone decides what to do with the results that come back. And that someone is usually a group or organization that has a political motivation. So in a sense, it's not so much about decentralizing governance. It's more about getting the sense of like what a large number of people think about an issue, and then a group of people are going to make a decision informed by all that information. I mean, is that an accurate statement? It sounds like the things you're talking about are governments that are trying to get consensus for laws they should pass. What kind of laws should it be? Red, green, or blue? They can get that feedback, but they're not asking the citizens to govern themselves.
That's a great question. So I think that when we're talking about deliberation in democracy, we're talking about can the citizens among themselves see how they feel, change their mind, map out the state of play, and things have gotten really fast and really confused. And so deliberation itself, I would say, is something that we should invest in. And I think that if we contrast the decentralized technologies like Blue Sky and the way that they're trying to approach that, for instance, with Twitter and said, I think people really would have been better off if Twitter had been an open protocol, had been, which was Jack's apparently original vision, which is why he went to Blue Sky, and then he's trying stuff in the crypto space. But here's the point that I'll make. We can draw a line straight through those three technologies. Jack was pinnacle of Web 2.0, centralized big tech with Twitter. He's totally invested and involved in that, but really wanted to have a decentralized element there. Then he goes and he leaves and he starts Blue Sky, but then he leaves that and he goes to blockchain. Now, the blockchain solutions still have terrible user experience for the public. They're impossible to get set up with. They're rife with fraud and scams. It hasn't changed, and we're a decade in. And I'm not on the boat. But
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
no, and fair and to Jack's situation, nobody's on that boat either.
Yeah, that's
Blue
true.
Sky,
Yeah, yeah.
which was able to win because there was an element of centralization. Even if, I mean, we can say open data, right? Like, so let's say that like Blue Sky has a protocol, okay, which people in the Web3 community generally like to talk about, and they have open data, which is extraordinary. But they're centralized. In Blue Sky has servers, and they have people keeping them up, and the servers run feeds, and the servers run the main site. Now you could copy it and run it yourself, but that's still a lot of work. Nostr, on the other hand, crickets. I think I think that we're in a, we can draw a line straight through, even though it had Jack star power, even though it had investment, and even though the concept is there of the protocol. These things have performance implications. To go to that decentralized technology has user experience and performance implications that the public isn't willing to go down. And so I think that it's important that the transparency element and the is a very important assumption of the next generation of, like, we would call it like pro-social technology or public interest technology or things like that. I think I might use a different word than that because of the different language. But I think that that the sweet spot that Blue Sky finds, that probably we find as well, maybe Signal finds. Signal is also centralized. Signal is cryptography. It's secure, but it's their server, and they use cloud services. But what they're storing is that. Signal, even though it's very powerful security, is still a nonprofit that runs it and things like that. And so, there is an interest, and I'll end here. I'll just wrap up by saying there is an interest in the community that wants to run organizations in a decentralized way of using Polis for that. And I think that that's a really interesting use case. And so I think that's really, they're really experimental crowd. And so decentralized governance versus centralized governance is I think a different problem than having a healthy public able to deliberate with itself, and having that public have a different relationship with power and have a different representation, different assumptions about about government. Sorry, I wasn't done. I have one more thing. Go ahead. Back to you.
Okay, so when I raised the question about very powerful technology companies that are centralizing the web, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, there's actually a very powerful person who is also making kind of authoritarian decisions right now without consensus, without widespread agreement, with a lot of people dissenting in very vocal ways. And that would be the president of the United States. He seems to be operating without even making the slightest effort to build consensus. If anything, he is demolishing it quite, athletically and enthusiastically. It seems to be the way he motivates his group. But if you think about who votes in the United States, half the people don't vote who could vote, and then of the people who vote, national elections are always very tight. They're always down, 51 to 48 or something like that in percentages, and president of the United States right now is governing with about 30% of the population in full support of him. And 70% either didn't have an opinion or were opposed, maybe more, depending on the day, depending on the latest outrage, the latest incident or whatever. How would Polis help the United States right now in its present situation, considering you have a president who's not that interested in knowing what people think? He probably does know what people think, and when he gets polls he doesn't like, he rejects them and says that they're fake news. So here we have a person who's not that interested in the feedback. The feedback's generally predictably negative anyway. So, like, for instance, should the Democratic Party start using Polis to get a sense of, like, what are the real issues people
Yes.
care about, and then kind of like, why aren't they doing that?
Yes. Yes, that's right. I think that when we think about the party politics, I think that, and you look at party leadership in the DNC, and that's exactly the place where we could say that there's an enormous problem. We have no credible opposition in the country, and we should immediately. And it should be instructed by a broad look at where the public actually is and what they want. I think the way that the Democrats got themselves into this position is that they ended up talking themselves into into a corner in a small group, and they ignored an enormous swath of the country, obviously, and how they felt, and that happened repeatedly.
Well, we're very much on the receiving end of wedge issues. It's very easy to define Democrats by the most extreme example that the opposing party can find, and it's easy to do.
That's right.
It's easy if you're conservative in any country,
That's right.
because the conservatives don't want to change anything, so they're against everything, so they don't have to take any risky positions because they're just about the status quo. Moreover, they're typically about rich people keeping the stuff that they've got, and they're against redistribution. So it's pretty tough to find a conservative who's going to say something really boneheaded, unless it's like overtly racist or overtly offensive, which they occasionally do, of course. But on the other side, if you're the progressive party, then you're about change, you're about inclusion, you're about marginal groups, you're about the people who are oppressed or who don't get represented, and you're bringing them forward. And sometimes those people don't look like the people in power, therefore you can easily make fun of them and turn them into a caricature and so on. And so we see that play out everywhere. It's not just the United States.
Yeah.
And it's also quite easy to get the people in the middle. You can demonize those extreme cases, and then that turns into
It happened.
It happens routinely, and it's not just Trump. I mean, this goes back to Willie Horton. Right? This is a standard political play. Richard Nixon, right? The Southern strategy, where you create these demons, whether or not they're accurate, there may be no accuracy behind it. Doesn't matter because it conforms to a stereotype that voters already have implanted in their head. Now, my thinking is Polis can help us surface other ideas. We talked in the beginning about how wedge issues can kind of reshape the electorate around hate and lack of consensus. But suppose there were a Democratic Party right now. Let's imagine that there were visionary leaders in the Democratic Party. I think it takes a heroic leap of imagination to envision that right now. Given,
so I think AOC has, I think that she has bold, specific, and large differences. I think it's fair.
Well, why isn't the Democratic Party running the entire operation on Polis? Why isn't there a politician in the United States who says, I'm going to have this up and running, and every time there's a vote or every time there's a decision I have to make, I'm going to find out what my constituents actually feel like, and I'm going to go with whatever they tell me to do. Okay. Why doesn't anyone do that?
That's a really great question. I'm going to work my way back there, hopefully quickly. And I'm going to say that I think political parties themselves, and this may be a surprising answer to you, but political parties themselves are unelected, permanent, self-appointed institutions that the founders built the country to avoid. The national factional poison is the language that you'll find in the Federalist Papers. It was the purpose of the federal government to avoid national faction. Now, that's quite a bit distant. I think we imagine that we have to have political parties because we imagine that if we didn't, we might slip into anarchy or there might not be anybody to run the government. But in fact, we're coming up on like half the country being independent. Now, to me, I mean, a very different, look, we're talking here, okay? Out of how whatever we got, let's say of 100% of the voting public, if you've got 50% independent, you've got 25% a Democrat, and then you've got like half of those that vote, and you got 12.5%, and then you got a few of those in a swing state. I mean, we're really far off here.
I mean, a small fragment is determining what
we're really far off here. I think that I have I would say a view on the United States that is much more inclusive than the self-appointed political institutions, so-called, of the parties, which have broken down. And I want to say we have seen these basically companies, the political parties as donation-taking entities, collapse under the power of personality on the left and the right. On the left, we see the Justice Democrats and kind of breaking away with AOC and Bernie. On the right, where is the check? And so in each of these cases, the parties are not fulfilling their self-check function. They're not bringing in extreme members. They failed. The U.S. political parties have failed, and we are obsessed with them because we don't have or see an alternative. And I think that that's the area that I have the most hope in from our work abroad, is that in disaggregating and decentralizing the issues away from the political vote, that is to say, voting on 1,000 different issues on a binary up-down, where we see that we can take Uber with thousands of people, thousands of votes, millions of votes, thousands of statements. When we have those kinds of numbers on just one issue, and the public is really engaged, then we're actually dealing with things, maybe with those in power, maybe it's the SEC or the FCC or whoever else is going to receive, public input or to interact with people, that there's a really different vision of how the public interacts with power. The public right now really is frustrated and hammering a button, and I think Trump was a protest vote against a political institutions of the parties when he won the first time, and I think it was, and he was as surprised that I think as anybody else that people cast that many protest votes against the existing incumbent parties and political families, etc. But they did, and so I think that if we can imagine the 50% of independents in the country mapping out where they were, and then beginning to guide the rest of the population, I think would be closer to the kind of inverted or upside down kind of view on political parties that I have, but I also think that the founders of the country had.
So back to my question, why isn't there a politician, perhaps a progressive politician, saying, I will do whatever the Polis results tell me that my constituents demand?
Right. So I think that there's a calculus when we've talked to political officials and elected officials. I've had conversations with people in government and those who are the math of electoral politics in the U.S. is just really simple. Or at least it has been. And so I would say that, you're bringing this up at a particular moment in U.S. history, where the electoral math, of things tipping one way or then the other, or finding the wedge issue and saying, well, can this help me identify the wedge issue? Oh, it's focusing on consensus. That's not what we do. It's a sad but true answer from politicians. And we really
So in other words, Polis doesn't solve a problem for political parties in the United States.
Polis does not solve a problem for electeds. Right. It solves a problem for the public itself. And the public itself wants to represent itself. And representative democracy should represent the public.
So we've got this giant, powerful middleman, if you will, a highly centralized power that's not elected, and that's called a party, a political party. Right. And it kind of sort of gets this consensus. It kind of creates a consensus if you opt in and identify.
It's a big tent. It's supposed to be a big tent.
And then magic happens in the back room, and they come out with a plank and a policy and a platform, and then that's what they go do. Well, gosh, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to be respectful of your time, Colin. I know how busy you are, especially these days. I'm sure your services are in great demand. Tell us how people can learn more about Polis and where they can find you on the web.
Yeah, so if you want to run Polis in your community, you would just go to pol.is. That's the place to start, and it's completely free and open source.
Fabulous. It's been a great pleasure having you on the Futurists this week, Colin. Thank you. Next time you come back, I want to talk to you about artificial intelligence and decentralized consensus, because I think there is a whole other conversation we could be having.
There is, in fact.
But in the meantime, we're going to carry on. Next week, we'll have another futurist joining us, telling about their views and how they're involved in shaping the future. And until then, I shall see you in the future. Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.